Alright, so here I am at the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. Got here a little early. They don't open until 10 o'clock, but it's about 10 minutes from now while I'm recording this, so I'm going to go in, check it out, and see what all they've got. So the National Video Game Museum is actually housed in this building called the Discovery Center, and it houses several other museums in it. There was like a model train museum, and I know some sort of science museum that looked like it was geared towards smaller children, and some other things. So it was pretty cool. When you first walk in, you see this kind of giant sculpture here. It's got different consoles and a bunch of screens on it that have different things playing. Once you're inside the museum, you're kind of greeted with some older type stuff, and there is this giant Pong game that's a lot of fun. I actually wound up playing this with a little kid, but it was a lot more difficult to control than you would think it would be. It had this giant circular controller just like the old Pong games, but it was very difficult, not very responsive. They had a lot of kind of cool statues. This was one of the focal points when you walked into the main area there. And so I thought this was cool because it represented a lot of different genres, a lot of different games. They also had this huge wall that had all sorts of different consoles. They were numbered, and you could go up to these giant Super Nintendo style controllers and basically scroll through and read all sorts of information about each of these consoles on those television sets right there. One of my favorite things about the museum was that they had just all sorts of consoles and computers set up for you to just sit down and play. So they had this whole wall there where you could just sit down and play different consoles that they had set up and going. They had a bunch of kind of video game related stuff, like these board games here. I thought that was pretty cool to see. A lot of these board games I had never seen before, so I thought it was pretty cool that they had that collection there. And it just seemed endless. Like it just seemed like everywhere you turned there was more. There was a lot of things that I'd never even seen before, even on YouTube or in books or whatever. So it was really neat to get to see that sort of stuff. Here you see a N64 DD, disk drive. So those were pretty cool. I've never actually gotten to see one of those in person until now, just because they're so expensive and kind of rare since they only came out in Japan. They had a lot of display cases that had different games and consoles and things, and they had, like a lot of museums, they had little placards with each thing that told you a little bit about it that I thought was pretty cool. So they had things like this white Atari Jr. that I believe it said it was the only one known to exist, and they weren't quite sure why it existed in white. So that was pretty cool. There were just kind of a lot of random things in here, but it was very well curated. There's things like this Atari Cosmos that I'd never seen before. A lot of the stuff that came out before my time. Some nice links here, and a very cool looking Atari 2600, kind of cool colors there. One thing you'll see in a second when I pan down here is that there were these wrenches. Right there they are, these wrenches and things with the certificate of authenticity that were actually used in the Super Mario Brothers movie. So I thought that was pretty cool. And of course, everybody loves Rob the Robot. He's a pretty cool little creature there. And then there were things like this Apple Bandai Pippin console that, I've only very briefly heard about and seen photos of, so it was really cool to get to see that sort of stuff in person. There was just so much packed into this space, and it was kind of a smaller space, but there was so much packed into it that it was definitely worth it. They had this little corner over here that basically represented the video game crash and what it looked like with store closings and discount bins and all those sorts of things. So that, I think, was a kind of a neat part of video game history that I'm glad that they showed. There was also a lot of just kind of patches and stickers and buttons and things that I guess they've just collected from various places that they had displayed on this wall. This part was pretty cool. This area was virtual reality, and so seeing a lot of the initial VR equipment, prototypes, that sort of thing, was really neat. And so, of course, it started with the Nintendo Power Glove and went all the way up through Oculus Quest. They had a lot of areas and a lot of things that were just prototypes. So they had this whole cabinet of prototype boards and games here that was really neat to see. And of course they had this giant wall of controllers. I thought this was very cool the way they displayed this with the Space Invaders theme behind it and the controllers kind of mounted to the wall. I thought that was a great way to display that. They had this small room off to the side that was dedicated to handhelds. So they had a lot of Game Boys. It seemed like they had just about every version and color of Game Boy that ever came out. They also had these little Coleco tabletop arcades that are pretty cool. And they had a bunch of Atari Lynx and things like that. That was just really neat to see. There was this area that was right outside of the arcade that had some more kind of arcade paraphernalia that was neat to see. This Miss Pac-Man I thought was really cool with the clear arcade shell where you could see in. This board was really interesting. So this actually showed different versions of Donkey Kong and how it looked on different consoles. Another cool thing was these areas of they had set up with like home type settings where you could sit down and play. They had this whole section of retro computers set up and ready to play. I thought this was one of the cooler things because retro computers are a lot harder to set up. It takes a lot more knowledge than just a console. And then they had this kind of timeline of computers that was really neat. I loved the way they had this displayed and set up. They, of course, had all your Atari stuff and all of that. And the last thing was they had an arcade inside. So for your admission, I believe it was a $12 admission. And for your admission, they give you 4 tokens that you can go use in the arcade. And you can always, they've got a change machine in there so you can purchase more tokens and stay in there as long as you want. But I just personally used the 4 tokens they gave me because I knew I'd be going to a barcade later. But I thought they had a kind of a nice variety of machines here. Everything seemed to be in good working condition. And so it was really cool just to see this set up the way kind of an 80s arcade was. So if you're in the area, please go visit the National Video Game Museum.